Greetings, brothers. Today I'm going to be talking about Devastators, Eradicators, and other fire support units that you can include. A few weeks ago we looked at a list where Devastator squads were actually included and it won a GT, so let's get into it and find out why these units perform so well. Alright, so start of this video, Devastators versus Eradicators, but we are going to branch out a little bit and you'll see as we go on. So the community requested this. Like I said, after a BA player won the tournament using Devastator squad, and the squad he used was actually 3 Grav-Cannons and 1 Multi-Melta. Now, I'll put a link to that army list at the end of today's video, so if you want to check that out, if you stay to the end, you'll be able to look at the list that won the GT. Now, we all know what Eradicators are. You get 3 of them in a squad. They're 45 points per model. They totally obliterate, which lets them shoot twice, as long as the squad doesn't advance and they all shoot at the same target. It's pretty strong. Eradicators wearing that Gravis armor, kind of survivable, and we're going to dig into both how much damage they can do and how much damage they can take as we go through this presentation. We also look at Devastators, so they can obviously have 5 to 10. You can like bump out the squad with more tactical marines at 18 points to try and give it essentially ablative wounds, but we don't really see that. You're going to see a 5-man squad, probably a sergeant and 4 heavy weapons. So Grav-Cannons are going to cost you 10, Multi-Melta's 20, and the sergeant does have a cool ability where once each turn he can make one of the guys improve their ballistic skill to 2-up, and if you do have a Sherb, that means you can double fire with a single model, obviously double fire with the guy that you made 2-up ballistic skill, so you can get some extra value out of that. Now let's talk about survivability. So I've been playing Eradicators now since the Armor of Contempt change, and they seem pretty good. So here are some numbers, and I've also included those Devastators, and then I also threw in a Relic Contemptor, because Relic Contemptors were kind of the staple before Armor of Contempt, so I want to see if they still perform. So you can see straight away, bolt rifles, Eradicators are, even with less wounds, the extra toughness means that they are a bit more survivable. So for the most part, your Eradicator squad looks like, I mean, this is about 20% more survivable, 15-20% more survivable, 10-20%, 10%. So across the board, it does look like your Eradicators are 20% more survivable against a bunch of weapons, but against some weapons, there's no difference, I guess. Once you get to like high strength above toughness 5, then there's going to be very little difference in survivability, especially if the weapon can do 3 damage, then it's just going to kill marines that much quicker. How does the Relic Contemptor look against these numbers then? I mean, it definitely keeps up with the Eradicators, and then against some of the 2 damage weapons, obviously the Relic Contemptor would only take 1 damage, so it's quite a bit ahead. It's good against Tau Plasma. That's what's my nemesis the last few weeks. I've needed something that can return fire against Tau Plasma, and I've been struggling. And I guess against other 2 damage weapons, or even realistically like high strength weapons, yeah, the Relic Contemptors look good. I guess the advantage now I see of Contemptor is it does score engage on all fronts. And obviously we know now that for engaging on fronts you need 3 models. Eradicators, the second you lose 1 model, if you're running them in a 3-man, they're not scoring engage anymore. Devastators, I guess, don't have such a problem because you could lose a couple. But Relic Contemptors can be viable in terms of survivability. We did obviously see a lot of them earlier in this edition. And since Armor of Contempt, a lot of people have dropped them. But they do actually get quite a bit of value out of Armor Contempt. So Relic Contemptors are good. Eradicators or Devastators, there's not a huge amount to pick between them. I guess we're going to look at damage next and just see how these both stack up. So this slide is the slide I use every time we look at damage comparisons. And I've taken like 3 Melta rifles from the Eradicators and I've put TO here for total obliteration. I took 1 Multi-Melta, firing on BS2 because the sergeant can do that, and the 3 Grav-Cannons. I also just took 1 Twin Volkite Covering and a Cyclone Missile Launcher Relic Contemptor onto this list because I think it's important to get a full picture. So if we actually break that down, this is the amount of damage that each weapon will do against various things. If, for example, Chaos Cultists only have 1 wound, then obviously damage is going to be wasted by shooting Multi-Meltas into them, but I'm not that good at maths. I might be quite good at maths, I'm not that good at maths to figure that out. So, Eradicators versus Devastators. If we picked something like Drukhari Raiders, surprisingly Eradicators are miles ahead. I would not have expected that. Against stuff like infantry and characters, Devastators seem fine, and then against maybe some of the armor knights, Devastators seem fine. So there's nothing like strikingly obvious from this comparison, which is basically the units that I look on week that makes me think Devastators are a lot better than Eradicators. Maybe against like Marines now, just 2-wound Marines. Obviously, Grav Devastators are going to be like Strength 5, -3, 2 damage. So they're going to be better at chewing through 2-wound models than Eradicators, obviously. And I guess better at 1-wound models as well, because not as much damage is going to be overflown and wasted. But typically I feel like if you have Devastators, you're probably shooting them at stronger targets. But sometimes in Blood Angel's list, you want to use your heavy support or your fire support to clear out screens so you can make those key charges. So I think Devastators and Eradicators are interesting, being that there's only 5 points difference between the two squads. I guess if you felt like it, you could obviously make one of the Grav Devastators the BS2 model. This doesn't include paying the points to add the Cherub, which you could do as well for that extra shot. It's kind of like an Alpha Strike because you only get to do it once. If you want to do damage, if you want to bring fire support, Grav Devastators and 1 Multi-Melta against Eradicators seem absolutely fine. What I did then was also I did the same comparison for that Relic Contemptor with the Twin Volkite and the Cyclone Missile Launcher, but he's got a fist, so this guy can still do some good damage in melee. I guess I haven't factored in any fist weapon. I mean, he could have a Stormbolter or something like that. How does he do? Well, the AP0 of the Volcon is obviously a little bit of a problem, so he doesn't do amazingly. I guess we know the thing with the Relic Contemptor is it swings some mortal wounds in there, so potentially you could get a couple of mortal wounds. I guess in this case it feels like you're trading off survivability from the Relic Contemptor for less damage for the Devastators, the Eradicators. I also threw in a double Volcon, because we do sometimes see them, but we haven't really seen them since the Volcons went up to 15 points in arm. I did say if they go up to 15 points in arm, I think they're going to be overcosted, and it really does seem like they are overcosted. Against monsters, they're going to do under 3 damage. That's a 170 point model that's going to do 3 damage. The mortal wound that they can do is calculated in here as well. So I guess they're just pretty bad. The low AP of the Volcons kind of hurts them. I guess the advantage of the Volcons is the range. You know, Grav Devastators have a 30-inch. The Relic Contemptor with the 1 Volcon and Cyclone Missile of a 36. Double Volcon has a 45-inch range. So I guess like you could probably position this guy far enough back in a board quadrant. He's going to get to shoot for the entire game, potentially, and kind of could be ignored because you could just stay out of range of the enemy, depending on the army you're up against. So double Volcons, not as great as they were. We're going to come to -1 damage enemies in a minute and we'll see how they get on. And then the Grav Devastators with the Cherub. I guess like if you just wanted to clear screens, maybe Grav Devastators with the Cherubs are actually really good. But then the thing that springs out to me then is like, what about Raiders? Because I played a game against Drukhari a few weeks ago and it was on the channel and it ended up being a 71-point victory. No, 71-point draw. It was a super close game and it was very difficult for me because I was running a ton of Multi-Meltas. And I ran a ton of Multi-Meltas into Tau as well. And if you're running Multi-Meltas into an army that basically only is going to ever suffer -1 AP, right? Because Raiders are 4-up save, 5-up invulnerable save at shooting. Tau drones are like a 4-up save, 4-up invulnerable save. So and the crisis suits are 3-up save, 4-up invulnerable save. So running Multi-Meltas into Tau and Drukhari is actually really ineffective because you're losing essentially 3 points of AP on every shot because of everything's got a damn invulnerable save. So at that point, the double Volcon actually does sort of kind of come out on top, which makes it even more confusing. Before I made these slides, I was thinking maybe in future I'm going to run double Eradicator squads. Now I'm actually, and before that I was running a Relic Contemptor with this loadout, like the melee version of the loadout, and an Eradicator squad. Now I'm actually kind of tempted to just run a double Volcon because the thing about running this loadout with a fist is he typically gets killed in 1 or 2 turns when you try and get him forward because you've got to move cover to cover. So maybe having one gun platform way far back that you can hide is a potential that you could actually make work. However, Grav Devastators with all Grav-Cannons, or Devastators with all Grav-Cannons, actually kind of look decent across the range here. So I've also done the same calculations looking at -1 damage enemies. Now -1 damage enemies are maybe not quite as prevalent in the meta right now, but I still think it's worth knowing because I think it gives you a full picture. There is a bunch of -1 damage enemies. You could run into them at a tournament. I think Death Guard should be a bit stronger since the Armor of Contempt changes came out. So let's have a look at the overall comparison if we use -1 damage enemies. So the Devastators against the Eradicators first. Again, the values look very similar. There isn't a huge amount to pull these two apart. I'd possibly even argue that the Devastators, I'd say, are just as good because you maybe get a little bit more flexibility in that you could use that Cherub and the 2-up ballistic skill on the unit of your choice. Now, the Relic Contemptor. Again, I mean, it seems like it just keeps up. There's no noticeable real differences between these. The noticeable real difference, I guess, is the Relic Contemptor is 40 more points. You're possibly paying the 40 more points for the improved survivability and the fact that you could Wisdom of the Ancients to get those critical reroll auras up if you need them. And obviously the Relic Contemptor is going to be a lot better in melee if we get to it, but all three of these choices against -1 damage, none of them really spring out to me. So I thought we'd look at the double Volcon again. Against -1 damage, the numbers are low. Again, the advantage here, I guess, is the 45-inch range. The 4x Grav with the Cherub. Again, the numbers are low. None of these really eclipse any of the Devastator and Eradicator numbers. The standout here, with 150 points, right under my picture, is going to be your Heavy Melt Rifles. The Heavy Melt Rifles obviously give +2 to all damage with the Multi-Meltas, and +4 if you're within half range. I guess the trade-off here is going to be that the second you move them, it's -1 to hit. There's no advancing as well in shooting because these are heavies. So, Heavy Metal Eradicators on paper, they look really good. I've used them before in games, and the way I see them is if the enemy is going to come at you, then they're brilliant. If you have to move to get to the enemy, and the enemy is not really coming at you, then they're difficult to get a lot of effectiveness out of. I usually say as well, Blood Angels, our biggest strength is our ability to move around the board and react to threats. I feel like Heavy Metal Rifles don't do that, but I know some people run Heavy Metal Rifles and they really enjoy them. I just don't think I've seen any tournament winning lists win tournaments yet with Heavy Metal Rifles. But on paper here, the +2 damage in basically every single shot, it's unarguable. It's by far the best in terms of if you're looking for like heavy anti-firepower. And maybe at some point Space Marine las cannons or something will become D3+3 like every other faction got the buff, and then that will hopefully give us some more options. But for now, Eradicators, Devastators, either a mix of Multi-Meltas and Grav, and those Contemptor Dreadnoughts, I kind of feel like they're still the three best options for us. If you don't like Plasma, like I do, because I hate killing my own models, and I really think Plasma should just be one mortal wound as opposed to a dead model, then I think these are your three best options. Now, try to do a little bit of a summary, just because there was a lot of information there. So against infantry and weaker targets, Volcons and Grav Devastators can do a lot of work. Seems to me there could be real value in the mixed Devastator squad, which is what actually won that GT. On paper, Eradicators are supposed to be very good into Dakari Raiders, but in practice I actually find them quite swingy because a couple of 5-up saves and all of a sudden the Eradicators are kind of just falling off against those Raiders, and Raiders can be a real problem, and I've had problems against like 5 Raider lists because I just don't know if I have the tools to just open up the Raiders. Some Blood Angels players will play giant squads of infantry that can basically surround the Raiders, but I don't play that. I play more like minimum size squads. Because of that, Drukhari can actually be a real problem for me. I think double Volcon is only slightly better than the single Volcon plus the Cyclone, but again in practice the single can feel a bit underwhelming for the points costs. But even double Volcons I think seem underwhelming ever since they changed them. They should have probably just put them up 10 points per arm, or put them up to 10 points per arm rather than 15 points per arm. Into the -1 damage enemies. As mentioned before, Heavy Metal Rifles are amazing, but in practice I find them very difficult to position, and obviously the -1 to hit and the no advance to fire. And beyond that, the double Volcon Dread does very little against those targets. You're just basically fishing for mortal wounds. In a tournament, it can kind of suck if you're just fishing for mortal wounds because it can go both ways. When you need the mortal wounds to happen, they won't happen. But the Wisdom of the Ancient, I guess, if you wanted to run like the double Volcon with some other fire support, maybe being able to re-roll the ones on hits or wounds on that other unit might actually give it some value. So potentially the Volcon, a single or double here, is actually still a decent option. And again, there's not a ton of difference between the Devastators and the Eradicators here. I guess the Devastators probably slightly more flexible, but the Eradicators slightly more survivable. So it really depends on where you can position them and what the map looks like. If you're on a map, I guess, where you could have your Devastator squad positioned well to have some good firing arcs, those graphs of 30 inches, you could be in cover, so you're on a 2-up save, ignoring -1, then I guess the Devastators can work, and the Shurub gives them some flexibility as well. So if you have Devastators and you're not running them, and it's something you're thinking, it looks like Grav-Cannon Multi-Melta is still a decent choice, and in some situations, maybe it just gives you a little bit more flexibility over just running Eradicators. So yeah, so if I had to conclude all the information together, and I guess it really, like I said, it does come down to priorities of what exactly you're trying to do in your list. So here's a quick summary, and hopefully you'll find this really useful. So Devastators all Grav are going to be great clearing screens, not so much damaged armor. Devastators with the 1 Multi-Melta and the 3 Grav, they're kind of solid all round, and against enemies that don't have damage reduction, they're very decent. Relic Contemptor with the twin Volkite and the Cyclone Missile Launcher is obviously the most survivable. The range damage is reliant on mortal wounds. They can bounce off -1 damage enemies pretty heavily. Double Volcon has basically similar issues. You're placing all your faith in mortal wounds, but Double Volcon is actually great against Drukhari Raiders. So if you're in a meta with a lot of Drukhari, you want to pop them, and you want something that's got more range than the Raiders, then Double Volcon actually I think still has some value here. Eradicators are similar in damage to the Devastators. They've got no power to clear screens. They're a little bit more survivable. And then those heavy metal rifles are the best at anti-armor. They're probably the best firepower we can bring against anti-armor, but they are let down by their lack of mobility. So I'll go ahead and place a link on screen now so you can check out the list that actually won the GT. It included a Whirlwind and 1 squad of Devastators. That was its fire support, and it's important to note that that list was just before Armour of Contempt. So essentially that list would have become a bit stronger since that has happened. As we get into the meta further, post Armour of Contempt, I'd love to hear any more suggestions for videos or feedback that people want me to dive into so that I can make content that is really useful and helps us out. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, I'd love it if you would hit that like button so it could share to some other people. If you want to support the channel in any way, shape or form, there's affiliate links, there's Audible links, there's a Patreon, there's a join button under every video. Any of these would be super appreciated. Regardless, I hope I will catch you in the next video. Thank you ever so much for watching, and please remember to subscribe. By the blood are we made strong, brothers. Peace.